I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Hey, hey. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. The beautiful audience, thank you so much. Welcome to the show. Yes. Yes. Thank you so much. Keep clapping. Clap if you believe. Clap if you believe. How would we know you believe if you don't keep clapping? Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. I am so excited about this episode. What a blessing it is to have you here with me, Spike Cohen. This is a Muddied Waters Media production. Check us out on muddiedwatersoffreedom.com. Check us out on Facebook. Check us out on Twitter, on YouTube, on SoundCloud. We're on Stitcher. I don't even know what that is, but we're on that as well. We're on everything. Just check us out everywhere. If you look for Muddied Waters of Freedom, pretty much anywhere you'll find us. We're working on a Patreon. We're everywhere. Check us out. What else? I would like to thank Kroger for the delicious drinking water that I'll be drinking today. I drink it on most episodes. So thank you again to Kroger for my water. The music that we use for the intro and outro for this, and so far every episode of My Fellow Americans, is from the very talented Mr. Joe Davi, Jodavi. Check him out on Bandcamp. Check him out on Facebook. Definitely go to his Bandcamp. Buy all of his music. He doesn't have a lot of. He has about a dozen songs. Buy all of them. It's like $8. Buy all of his music. You'll be so happy that you did it. And you'll be so glad that you downloaded Joe Davi. As always, shout out to Tehran Turks' mom and him. Guys, my guest tonight is, I'm very excited about my guest tonight. He is a political trainer and consultant. He's regularly featured by the Foundation for Economic Education at fee.org. His work can also be found on Fox Business Network, HuffPo, the Independent Voter Network, and other outlets. He's the author of the book If You Can Keep It, and he's most recently has developed the Weapons of Mass Persuasion program. His work focuses on persuasion and unity across political divides, teaching people the tools to help them effectively spread the message of liberty. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to my show my esteemed friend, Robin Koerner. Robin, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Spike. That was quite the introduction, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome, and I don't know why you're that small, and we're going to change that as we're talking.
Yeah, actually, on my screen, there's now two of me. Just you did something, and another one of me appeared. And maybe it's not possible to have too much of me, but my mother would disagree.
Well, I would definitely disagree with your mother as well, and I'm fixing the issue of Robin not being large enough right now.
I've been trying to fix the issue of Robin being too large with my intermittent fasting. But now I can't hear you.
You can't hear me now?
Oh, now you're back.
Okay.
It's doing all kinds of funky things.
Oh, good. I love when it does funky things while we're live. That's my favorite thing. Okay, good. So I think I've got you normal size now. Let's see. There we go. And you're not the right size there. Oh, good.
And there's a delay now. There's a big delay on the sound. Oh, and you've gone silent.
Have I gone? I've gone silent again.
Oh, and now you're back.
Oh, good. All right. So
oh, and now there's three of me. Then there was three. Now there's one. No, there's two. There's a big and a small.
We're going to make this work. I'm telling you right now. Okay, good. So that's all right. So that's you there. That's you there. That's you there. We have made everything happen correctly. Okay, good. Now we can actually do the show. Robin, you are a Cambridge University graduate, an internationally acclaimed author. You are a respected political and economic commentator in major media. And now here you are talking with a Jew in his guest room. What an honor that must be for you.
Well, it is. Actually, you're overselling me, I hate to say, because if I was internationally acclaimed, then I'd probably be richer than I am. So I don't think I've got there yet, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, I didn't say you were rich, but you have acclaim.
No, I know, but
acclaim is free. So.
Yeah, but I think you might, walking the streets of Mongolia, I think you might have difficulty finding anybody who would acclaim me. But thank you. Actually, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say your point about the speaking to a Jew, and I do like your local Jew byline.
Thank you.
I don't know if you saw my latest article about identity politics, but I actually
the racial one. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's the first time, maybe only the second time in the 8 or so years I've been involved in politics publicly, that I've referenced my Jewish background.
That's right. Your grandfather, great grandfather.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that. So it's two Jews talking with each other in their various locales.
It's a Jew and a quarter. And
it's a Jew and a quarter.
Technically, you could say only one because, of course, Judaism is passed down the mother's line. So I'm not. But
okay, well then it's majority Jew. We're having a majority Jew conference here.
There you go.
I'm happy. In fact, have I had any Jews on my show? You might be the first. If not Jew, then Jew adjacent guest that I've had. Jewish-ish. So that's perfect. So thank you again for joining. First of all, so whenever I have a guest on, the first thing that I ask is how you would describe your political beliefs, and how you would say you got there. Was it sort of an aha moment? Is it sort of this evolution that happened over time? How would you describe that?
Some point very soon, I am going to coin a new term for my political beliefs. Okay. And when I do it, you'll know about it.
Okay.
But for now, given what I know about the folks who are going to be watching this show, let me say I am epistemic libertarian, I think would probably be a good label. I don't like labels at all. Okay. But if since you're kind of asking for one, and I probably need one for the shorthand, I probably gravitate classical liberal, I guess. But whenever I get asked questions like this, the first thing I usually do is quote Kierkegaard, who said, "If you label me, you negate me." And I think the negation that comes with labeling is only one of the problems that comes with labeling. How long do you want me to go on for about my beliefs? Because if I start, that could be a half-hour monologue.
Buddy, I end up falling asleep in this chair half the time, so you can really you can go on as long as you want, honestly.
That's not what I'm aiming for, though, Spike.
Okay, good, yeah, no, I didn't mean during the show. I just mean after the show, I'm doing stuff, and then I wake up, and so no, I didn't mean my guest put me to sleep. That would be fun, though, huh?
Right.
So I'm assuming just based on the things I've read, you kind of lean towards the idea of minarchy than anarchy. Am I correct? More like you want to.
I'm kind of sick of answering that question.
Okay.
Right. I'm interested in moving in the direction of more freedom,
right.
And whereas anybody, if people self-identify anarchist, minarchist, libertarian, I don't, anti-authoritarian. I don't know. It's such at this point of here's the Constitution on the wall behind me.
Right.
I spend a lot of time studying the history of how we got to this thing, and the psychology of how we convince people of what's good in this thing and beyond. Right. Obviously, I'm not saying it's a panacea, but it's a pretty sublime effort. So given all that, how many libertarians can dance on the head of a pin, and what shall we call them when they do so? I find it kind of beside the point. The point being, what do we need to be doing, thinking about, and working out to actually increase the liberty that we enjoy, as individuals and as a nation. So one of the things that I teach, you've got my weapons of mass persuasion thing here. So that refers to a program that I launched not too long ago, weaponsofmasspersuasion.com. One of the things I talk about in there is that successful politics is done with direction in mind. Now, obviously, direction and destination are related, but political change, even large step change in politics, it never takes you to a utopia in one jump, whatever you.
Right, of course.
Yeah, it's about how far can you go in a certain direction, and even those changes. And I'm talking now kind of historically, going back 1,000 years of Anglo history, if you like. Even the big step changes towards liberty, they still leave you miles away from where you would want to be as a minarchist today, as an anarchist today, as a libertarian today. Right. So my point is that when I said epistemic libertarian, to have a belief about whether it is possible to get, the amount of government to zero, is like, that's an interesting discussion, and libertarians seem to be obsessed with it. And I say obsessed just because whenever I go to these big conventions, I'm so often asked to do we're going to have a minarchy-anarchy debate. Would you take the minarchy side? And people always ask me to take the minarchy side, even though I don't have a declared, the position on here, right. because I think what's important is actually is intellectual humility, is the understanding that we've got to have more freedom. The moral burden always has to be on the person or the institution that seeks to use force to do good, because I don't know what's best for you. And frankly, most people barely know what's best for themselves. We certainly don't know what's best for
others. Right.
And obviously, that's not controversial among libertarians. But the other thing I would say is, even just because we may care about liberty and have probably read more of the great authors in the liberty canon than most folks, in many instances, that still doesn't mean that each one of us who thinks we know so much knows enough about liberty, knows everything there is to know. That despite the fact that we feel that we have a very, in some cases, precise and consistent conception of liberty, let's say as an ideological system, that we know enough even, let's say, to argue for one projected into the future version of, utopian version of this liberty, the system of liberty that we would like to see manifest, versus another. I just think if we're spending time answering that question and talking about it, we're not spending time doing the actual things we need to do to create massive political upheaval in the direction of liberty. So it's a long way of saying I think the minarchist-anarchist thing is a head fake.
Well, and it's kind of, like you said, so we're currently headed in the other direction. So spending a tremendous amount of time. I mean, it's good to have those types of discussions. And I, for those who know, I'm obviously more in the anarchist camp, but I'm also in the let's start heading that way camp. And, so that's, we can argue about whether minarchy or anarchy or that can become our primary discussion when we're already there, when we have a government that's so small that, we're able to have a discussion about whether we even need it at all. Right now, $1 trillion a year added to the national debt, and, an increasing number of, global wars happening, in perpetuity. I see how outside of liberty, because I love arguing with other libertarians a lot. And, but outside of that circle, to see us arguing about, the finer points of whether the state can exist to protect property or not seems kind of silly when the state isn't even trying to protect property. And so I get what you're saying there.
And I would go even further than that, right? Liberty, Jefferson said, I can't remember the exact quote. I mean, there's probably a few of them, but Jefferson said very much that the last bulwark of liberty has to be, the education and the demand of the people, right? And so if we're having conversations with ourselves while allowing the popular mind, right, to care less about liberty,
right,
actually reduce, that's not the American idiom, to actually, to care to a fooling extent about the importance of their own liberty, to even be less able over time to notice liberty as it's being taken away from them. Right. If we're having discussions with ourselves about this hypothetical world, then actually, it isn't okay for libertarians to be having those discussions. It's not okay. That is not doing what we need to do if we're serious about increasing liberty, rather than having an intellectual masturbatory ego trip. And I'm like, as you can tell from the tone of my voice, I'm like, let's stop the masturbatory ego trip thing. Let's try and get the minds of people to be able to conceive and perceive the thing we care about, supposedly.
The reason that I'm laughing is because my last episode was a debate that I called the Masters of Debate. And so this is the anti-masters of debate, or the masters of anti-debate that we're having now. So that's good. So I just care.
You see, and just to be clear, right? I'm actually an intellectual purist by instinct. You mentioned, I think I'm a graduate of Cambridge. I studied physics. I studied physics at Cambridge, and then I studied philosophy of science. Like, it doesn't become any more purist, cognitively and intellectually, logically than subjects like that.
Right.
So I'm happy for us to do it. But let's not, if we're spending more time doing that, especially on Facebook, let's say, pretend that we actually care more about liberty, actually in reality, than anybody else.
Right.
Let's just not pretend it, Okay. Yeah.
This is a personal attack against me. No, it's not. I'm just joking.
No,
No. I know. I was just kidding. So,
somebody needs to say this, right? Because what I'm starting to see now in circles, in liberty circles, is that the doing of one seems to is coming at the expense of the other, and I don't think this needs to be an either or.
Yeah,
right. It can be a both and, but let's just be honest with what do we spend our time arguing about? Because if what we really cared about was actually changing the country, rather than proving I have the right belief in, with respect to libertarian doctrine, then I tell you, 90% of the debates I see in libertarian circles wouldn't be there, because we'd be so busy trying to work out how was it actually that the minds of entire populations have allowed liberty at sometimes to recede and at other times to increase. How is it that we actually change a culture to change politics towards liberty? How is it, if we're so right, that liberty is the desire and demand for liberty is innate, that it's such a wonderful thing, and that most Americans are libertarians, if only they knew, that they are voting for a government that is doing the exact opposite? Clearly, we're missing something.
Right.
We really care about it, and that's what motivates me, as you can see.
Right. In fact, our guest, one of our viewers, Jacob, wrote, "Minarchists and anarchists just need to band together for now. We can argue about the minutia later." And I think that's essentially what you're trying to say, that that's not really important. But like you said, it's
and that's right, and that's a good point, and obviously, and you do hear a lot of libertarians saying that, which is great. But more than that, right? If we want to reverse the tide of tyranny, which I think we can, everybody listening to this show can buy into, it's not just anarchists and minarchists. There's also regular Americans who are sick of having their shit taken and their rights taken and their kids taken and their freedom taken because they supposedly committed a crime that didn't hurt anybody. Right. Those people in the grip of all those experiences, they can be part of that camp of, the tent of, we're done with this. If only we are speaking to them, which is what my Weapons of Mass Persuasion thing is about, and my book is about, I guess. In a way that we easily and naturally work together on these things, because it's been done in history. It's been done in history, and we, the blueprints are there. So yes to the anarchists and minarchists, but the fact that we are even discussing if it's anarchists and minarchists banding together versus not banding together shows how much of the point we're missing. That shouldn't even be in question. It's the anarchists, the minarchists, the disaffected, that I'm sick of the Democrats, I'm sick of the Republicans, which is the majority, right?
The vast majority, right.
70% that more in common identified in a large survey that they called the exhausted majority, that I have called elsewhere the silenced majority, who feel that the established political processes don't give them an outlet for their political sentiments. At those times in history, liberty has been able to harness disaffection and really make a difference. And and that's why in my book I have kind of a historical chapter, because I want libertarians to understand how we go from the theory to the practice, right? Both psychologically, and when you put lots of people together, psychology writ large is history.
Right.
Historically, then we can start to implement some of those patterns. So yes to your viewer there, and some.
And then some, yeah. So what brought you to the U.S. originally? Was it work, or what? Was it accident, or?
It was a woman. It's always a woman.
Oh, it was a woman.
It was a woman, but that was a long time ago, and then it didn't work out. But there's a story. And but I did fall in love with the United States, and after the thing with the woman didn't work out, I went back to the country I thought I was going to make my life in, which was actually in East Asia. It was in Taiwan. But okay. I had a change of heart and decided I wanted to immigrate to a country where English was the first language, so I could develop myself professionally. And that's another long story about the research I did and how I chose the country. But I knew from my experience chasing this woman to California that I liked the US, that I felt like an American in a British body. So I'd give it a punt. And so here I am.
Nice. Well, we're glad you're here. My wife can sympathize or empathize with you there. She moved here for me, but she's not. She's a Canadian in a Canadian body, and has remained as much.
Have great bodies. I've spent quite a bit of time up there.
I love my Canadian's body. But we can do a show about that.
Anytime.
So as I was telling you when we were getting ready with my various technical issues that I had, I actually have heard of you before, or I've read from you before, from an article you did back in, was it 2011 or 2012, the Blue Republican?
Yeah.
So I remember reading, and I think it was someone that said, thought, it was from Facebook that it originated, I believe, and it was someone that said something along the lines of, look, even the Democrats are waking up. I don't think that they realized that you weren't necessarily, or I guess at the time you were sort of by default a Democrat, sort of a progressive by default. But it was a very interesting article where you broke down to some extent the argument for someone that was not conservative or Republican, why they should vote for Ron Paul, that he was pretty much everything that the good things that Bush and then eventually Obama promised, but simply would not deliver on. So, tell me about what inspired you to write that.
So I had going back just 1 year before that, so say 2010, I had no interest in politics whatsoever. Being an intellectual purist, I was interested in physics and philosophy and things like that, right? And so the dismal sciences like economics and politics, and it wasn't. But I had actually it started with me doing a little research for a book I was thinking about writing, and I stumbled across this video by Peter Schiff. And do you remember when he was predicting the housing crisis? And I was very taken with this video. It was one of those compilation videos of Peter Schiff was right.
Right.
They were all laughing at him, and he kind of nailed it. And I was really interested that he was laying out some simple economic axioms, making specific testable predictions, and then the predictions came back tested and correct, right?
Right.
And this is like, oh my God, this is an economist doing something that actually resembles real science, as a trained physicist. So I was curious, and literally I was curious enough to Google this term Austrian economics that he mentioned on one of these news clips. And that was my rabbit hole. And so I actually got into the libertarian thing through researching Austrian economics. I kind of went that way. And a lot of my early writing, and indeed, I think the biggest chapter maybe the second biggest chapter in my book is an economics chapter. There's a lot of Austrian economic stuff in there. So I went from there to discovering libertarianism, probably on a side panel of a Wikipedia page.
Right.
Libertarian, and
As one would, right.
As one does, yeah, right, And with the help of a libertarian friend of mine who I'd never paid any attention to, or not his politics anyway, before
Right.
that, I got a reading list, and I did the basic my first liberty stack of books, Hayek and Bastiat and all the good stuff, and Hazlitt.
Right.
And the thing that terrified me and was very humbling, it was great, was that I shared a room studying physics at Cambridge with a guy doing political science in my second year, and we were close friends.
Oh, okay.
And somehow, in arguably the greatest university in Europe, sharing a room with a political scientist, I'd never heard of Hayek or Bastiat. I'd never read any of the canon of, let's say, classical liberalism, of, let's just say, the broad liberal tradition that was directly drawn upon to write this thing behind me,
Right.
That's the Constitution, by the way, for those who can't see it.
It's the Magna Carta.
Yeah, right. So, that was shocking to me. It was appalling. I was appalled at my own ignorance, and so I started reading, if you like, the bits and pieces of the Liberty canon. So when 2011 came, and the presidential election, to get to the Blue Republican thing, I had a horse in the race, and my horse was Ron Paul. And I hadn't been a Democrat. I mean, I wasn't even American, so I legally couldn't be anything.
Right.
But I never voted. I don't know if I'd voted at all. I'd certainly never voted, Democrat or Labour, which would be the British equivalent.
Right.
But one thing I know about is sales and marketing. I'm good at meeting people where they are. And, one of the things I spent a lot of time studying in my graduate degree in philosophy of science was actually epistemology, which is the philosophy of belief and knowledge. Why do we trust what we believe? Well, I draw on that a lot now in my work when it comes to political persuasion. And so I was like, look, all of my best friends are progressive, right? As you said earlier, progressive by default. If you're middle class and educated, you're well-meaning, and you haven't read the books, you think, well, why don't you just use this thing called law and government, which seem to be given, to manifest your good intentions? Progressive by default. So I was like, well, I can speak that language, right?
Right.
So the travesty of Blue Republican, if I can call it that, was that somebody who'd literally spent not even a year thinking about politics could write an article that created the largest coalition for Ron Paul, that remained the largest coalition for him right up until the convention.
Yep.
So that was, and when I did that, it made such such ripples, and it kind of put me on the map in politics.
Right.
That I did the best part of 100 interviews, probably 80-something interviews in that year. Sometimes people wanted to hear the Blue Republican case, and sometimes Liberty folks were like, "Well, how do you do that? How did you create this big coalition of mostly progressives and independents?" And it's like, it's doable, and I teach people to do it now if they want to learn. So I realized that was my calling, that I discovered this passion for liberty, and I discovered that actually my skill set was, or at least the application of my skill set to ideas, moral and political ideas, was, if not unique, it was very scarce. And so that was the good that I could do. And that's the good I've been trying to do, since then, and I hope to do for the rest of my life.
And I assume is that kind of what led to you later writing If You Can Keep It?
Yeah. I mean, yes. I think that's what motivated me.
Okay.
To write. Actually, what motivated me to think of the book, when I first conceived the book, it was actually, it was before I'd done a lot of work in libertarian circles. It was partially motivated by watchingamerica.com, which I set up. Anybody can go to it. I set up in 2004, 2005, and it's just a website that finds and translates foreign opinion, commentary, editorials about the United States from media all over the world.
Oh, okay.
And I just thought that was a cool paradigm-busting, break down the final barrier among human beings, which is the language barrier idea, back back before there was WordPress, back before there were lots of things actually, and so I had this interest in intellectual humility, in, if you like, epistemological humility before I discovered libertarianism, and in a way, and watching America is kind of a tool to humility for Americans, and one of the reasons I think the liberty philosophy grabbed me politically was that it's about building a world where humility, where the acting on humility, the acting on the understanding that I don't know what's best for you,
right,
is favored and supported, and because I think that's the right way to live. I was pleasantly surprised when I discovered there was a political philosophy, a system, if you like, that would support that, that broader view that I had.
right.
So the original motivation for If You Can Keep It was to explore this gap between American self-identity, right? So, and how America actually is and acts in the world, right?
Right.
But then soon after I had that idea, I got passionate about liberty, and I had a framework for that, right? Because I was like, well, America understands itself as the land of free enterprise, the land of free people, the land of
the
all
free,
this,
and
right?
yeah.
And they said, well, it ain't that. So I was able to bring to bear, I think, a much better informed, a much more sophisticated body of knowledge to the book when I eventually wrote it, which was years after I'd first conceived it. And
Right.
I should say, because this goes to the things that I know that our viewers are interested in, I had a draft of this book on my hard drive for years. And the more I studied about liberty, the more I was thinking, oh, that thing I wrote in that chapter needs to be done better. That's not right. I know better now.
Right.
And I thought one day I would get back and rewrite most of the book. And I was at an International Students for Liberty event in 2016. I think it was 2016. And I was sharing some of what I had learned with the many hundreds of students there. And what I had learned about how you actually implement liberty, how you actually get Democrats' minds, Republican minds to change, to actually give up a political identity and
Right.
identify somewhere else. Because that's what I did with Blue Republican en masse, right? That's my kind of special skill. And I was talking to a lot of the students who'd been trying to do activism on campus, and I was getting these unbelievably excited, superlative reactions. Like, I lost count of the number of people who said something along the lines of, we've been to every one of the stalls in the exhibition hall, and we've never heard this. This is what we need. This is what we need. And I thought, I've
Right.
got to go and write that. So I went back, and in 2 weeks, I basically rewrote 2/3 of the book that had been sitting on my hard drive with the accumulated knowledge, drawing on, I guess, a lot of the hundreds of articles I'd written, in the meanwhile.
Right.
But also a lot of the things that were just in my head that I needed to formalize and clarify and actually turn into something that would be useful for people that actually practically want to advance liberty. So that means unpacking why it is people see in America liberties that have been taken away, and see in their own lives or believe that they have liberties they don't have any longer. And if you don't understand that, you can't fix it.
Which is, at times, that's one of the hardest things, because, I grew up in the States, and it's pounded under our heads. You're free, freedom, liberty. We're celebrating our freedom. We fought for independence. We're independent, free, and we have liberty. And, you see the terms liberty and freedom used liberally in both the Republican and Democrat parties. You will have, Trump or Obama or Bush unironically sit up there and talk about how free we are. And then when you start to talk to people about the fact that they're not free, at least the way I do it, a lot of times they become very uncomfortable. And so you have to kind of dial it back because they don't like the idea that they're not free. And they'll go, well, you just want to be a heathen or whatever. It's like, no. I'm not saying you should do those things. I'm saying you can't do those things. And the fact that, if you bring up weed or, whatever, if you bring, and I've been sober for 12 years. I certainly don't want to smoke weed, but you'll bring up something like weed or selling raw milk or keeping all of your income or not being robbed to pay for people to be murdered all around the world. And you bring up those things and all the, like, you call them cognitive defenses, they all go up and they're like, no, I'm free. And it's like, and there's that saying that it's harder to free, I'm going to butcher it because I'm not even sure how it went, but it's easier to free a slave than to convince someone that they're a slave. And, that's sort of, slavery is a bit of a probably a little bit of hyperbole there, but when you tell someone, no, you're really not free. There's a tremendous amount of things that you go through every day that are not synonymous with freedom. And the reason that you live as comfortable a life as you do is because you've been so conditioned to live within the boundaries of what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do, that it's just second nature and you don't even realize what's happening. And I assume that's, a big part of what you talk about is in having a good existential crisis causing way of telling someone and having them realize, no, I'm not free.
Exactly. So, many of my passionate libertarian friends have been having lots of arguments between minarchy and anarchy. Right. I've been, and I'm really serious about this, I've been spending hundreds of hours over the last few years researching what that is about. So I've been doing a lot of psychology, how it manifests, why it manifests, and how you can stick the lever under it and change it, right?
Right.
And I believe with all my heart that if we're actually interested in saving this country for liberty, or saving liberty for this country,
right?
That's the biggest part of the puzzle. And it also happens to be the part of the puzzle that we don't have. So what is it? What are those defenses? Why are they there? And how do you go under, around, or over them? Because it turns out now more than ever, of course, we really know how to do that. But it's not trivial, right? You have to pull together a lot of what we know about neurology, about psychology, about sales and marketing, about behavioral economics. But there's so much now to draw on that actually and this is beyond academic now. There are people all over the world who understand this, some almost accidentally, but some quite consciously, and employ it. And so my work, and I have always, written it for those with a liberty bent, because I want liberty pursuing folks to use this work,
right,
has been about to kind of crystallize out this knowledge and then turn it into actual techniques that you can use. And many of them, by the way, you have to apply to your own thinking as much as to other people's.
Right.
That when you kind of take a certain kind of perspective on your own beliefs and how you got to them, that kind of does half of the work in changing how you need to communicate with other people. And it also enables you, or because it also enables you, to experience what you're saying as them.
And so this is part of my problem in particular. Part of what brought me to libertarianism was people telling me uncomfortable things and me having that reaction and saying, you just hate America, you want the terrorists to win, you're a, if the term had been more prolific then I would have called him a cuck, but that wasn't really a big thing back then, at least not outside of, Nazi circles or whatever. It wasn't as prolific as it is now, but that's what I would have called them. I mean, if that had been a term then, a more prolific term. And it took me really hearing that and then saying, you know what, let me make sure I really think what I think, and going back. But I also realize I'm not like most people. Most people don't have that level of, I guess, intellectual curiosity. I'm not sure what to call, or self-deprecation or whatever, maybe a combination of those things. So that helped. The way that libertarians argue is what brought me to libertarianism, but I'm not wired like most people, clearly. So I think that's what you're talking more about, is to get the people that think like most people think.
Well, right. I mean, and like I say, there are people like us who are doing things like this.
Right,
but
right.
you know, that's not how you turn a country. One of the things that it's a slide. I'm kind of that's in my weapons of mass persuasion course. I try and get people like us who might be taking the course
Right.
to realize how unrepresentative we are, because not only are most people not living in an essentially one-dimensional moral universe of freedom versus oppression as the dominant moral axis. Most people do not have systematized, even conscious moral beliefs, moral beliefs of any kind. Right.
It's very situational. Right.
Right. The coherence of most people's beliefs, whether they be political or moral, is kind of to be explained. You have to go to a set of perspectives or assumptions that most people are likely not even to be conscious of having. So you have to kind of get more conscious of, let's say, their biases and their motivations than they are. Now, I teach people how to do that. I do that in my work. Now, it's not rocket science. It's science, but it's not rocket science.
Right.
And again, I marvel at how many times, and I own my own frustration about this, but, to put my cards on the table, I wonder at how many times I see the same conversation in libertarian threads about, we need to be better at this, need to be better at that. And I think, I've been asked to talk about that more times at libertarian events than I can count on my fingers and toes. And so now, not only... So I've built a program that does that thing that you've been asking for. Now I'm building a campaign. I did the outline of a campaign for the LP that incorporates these principles. I've been writing for free. I've spent hundreds of hours of time for free doing intellectual work that I could have been spending doing a PhD on this stuff. And I put these articles up for libertarians to read and assimilate and use. And I'm not saying I'm the only one that knows it, or I'm the smartest guy in the room. But if we care about liberty, let's take the value that we have in our movement wherever we find it, and use it as best we can use it. And let's not keep saying, well, we need this and we need that, when there's some dude over here that's actually giving it to you. That's how I feel.
He did this for you people, guys. So do you think that libertarians, generally speaking, have a unique problem with communicating with normies, or do you think it's an uphill battle for us to fight against status conditioning that most people have, or is it maybe just a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. But I don't want to overstate either. One of the reasons it is a combination of both, but as I say, neither of these things are insurmountable. Interestingly, and this is a crass generalization, but useful. In terms of personality, libertarians are more like progressives than conservatives. So we're high in trait openness. We tend to be lower in trait conscientiousness. But the exception is that to turn a progressive into a libertarian, what you need to do is turn down the empathy and turn up the rationality. So we are kind of like slightly autistic progressives. Now, obviously, progressives are like what we think today as a progressive. They tend to, read Jonathan Haidt on this. But I also discuss this at length in my courses. They exist on the care harm axis, right? Progressives, their political morality tends to be framed in terms of care harm. Now, if you're a libertarian, your one-dimensional moral universe is on the liberty oppression axis. Now, one of the things, I exercise for the reader, if you like, that I do when I work with libertarians is, and sometimes I have to do this myself as a liberty guy when I'm consulting, let's say, to an organization that needs to reach folks on the left, is, okay, you can take pretty much any one of your libertarian principles and reframe it as a statement of a means of reducing harm and increasing care. When you get really good, you can concentrate it on, you can frame it as just that for a victim group, or a group that you can identify as a victim group so that you can start to get the hard left. So things like this. And so we don't, as it seems to me that a disproportionate amount of the volume inside self-identified libertarian circles comes from folks who want to, have those finer point hypothetical arguments rather than, okay, political activism. How do you learn that and how do you do it? Let's get out and do it.
Right, because they don't want to talk to normal people, a lot of them.
Yeah, so that bit I put on them. But, the other thing is, obviously, you see more of the good and the bad in the circles that you stay in, right?
Oh, of course, right.
So I don't want to say, but there is a great. Okay, so the ineffectiveness of a political philosophy,
right,
in proselytizing outside itself, is often a form of the strength, one of its the greatest strength that motivates it, turned up to an excessively high volume such that everything else gets drowned out.
Right.
So when you're talking about, let's say, the social justice left, right, what you have is kind of like a pathological commitment to not actually caring, but experiencing oneself as caring.
Right, signaling that you care to those around you, including yourself. Yeah.
Yes. So what happens is that motivation gets kind of it's a good real motivation, but it gets distorted, right? Now, I would say the libertarian version of that, and God knows we have our libertarian version, is, well, we are smarter. We have systematized it more. We have read more books. We have, right, which is true, but then it gets turned up. And so so then we get to, whatever it is that we do at the extremes, which is ineffective, and we believe it's because we're smarter, or we believe it's because
they're just so stupid. Yeah,
right? And it's it's actually falsifying, but don't say that to the folks engaged in it. Just as if you said to the social justice warrior, types that we have. I'm in Seattle, up at UW there. That's not going to be the way to get to them, right? So. Again, it's I don't expect by saying this to you here, Spike, that folks who my libertarian friends who think that hat fits them will want to take it from me. I'm sure they will disagree with me, and that's fine because I'm just talking to you.
It takes all kinds. Like I said, it took me hearing things. Anytime I've made any major philosophical changes, it has taken someone. Either me in researching things or someone actually talking to me saying something that created a level of cognitive dissonance in me that I could recognize and then respond to it. So hearing that I might possibly be a Democrat with Asperger's is a powerful thing. A powerful thing.
Now I want to pull out something very. I want to clarify and emphasize something that you said.
Okay.
That I also make much of in my political persuasion work. It's crucial to do this. If I tell you what you think and you disagree with it, you're not going to believe it just because I explained it to you and gave you the facts.
Right.
But what I need to do, which is probably what you experienced when you moved over to, when you saw the light, when you decided, okay, I'm going to identify as a libertarian, let's say now, rather than whatever you identified with before, was that you were invited to take some part of the paradigm that you were already consciously bought into and test it against some other part that someone pointed out to you. There was an inconsistency, right? And you got the dissonance is an internal experience.
Right.
Now,
right.
if I'm going to give you something that isn't part of your paradigm, you can easily avoid the dissonance by just simply rejecting it, right? Rejecting the facts on which it's based, which is what we do all the time.
What everyone does, right.
And this is why, anarchist arguments to progressives, let's say, based on the non-aggression principle, don't work, because it's so far out of their paradigm, they're not connecting with it.
Right.
However, if someone says, look at this thing you believe. Does it really, this principle you believe already, does it really sit consistently with this, let's say, policy you're supporting? Now, this is what I did with Blue Republican, by the way. It's exactly what I did.
No, that's exactly what you did with the article.
You trigger the cognitive dissonance. So I want to teach libertarians to do that, you know, and I don't care whether you're a minarchist, a classical liberal, an anarchist. You need to learn that if you're going to move the country towards where you want to go.
Right, and that's what weapons of mass persuasion is about. It's sort of weaponizing, people to be able to be activists and actually effectively get people. Now, in the previews about weapons of mass persuasion, you talk about learning how to know how people, knowing how people form their beliefs, listening to where they're coming from, a lot of listening, a lot of, before you start talking to them, listen more. And in your articles where you talked about, the last few I've read, most notably the one about toxic masculinity, and then the other one about racial issues. Half of the article was you talking about how you asked people questions and that you formed your opinion and your perception of it based on what people were saying. Whether you ended up agreeing with it or not, you were listening to people. And so, you talk about that. You talk about avoiding zero-sum I win, you lose arguments, avoiding setting off cognitive dissonance, cognitive dissonance, setting off the defenses. I have, just in my own personal path, I've been researching Stoicism a lot recently, and it talks a lot about the same type of stuff, avoiding reacting emotionally, and instead, when you get that emotional reaction, examining why you had it and really drilling down into that, and sort of kind of taking a step back. Weapons of mass persuasion seems to go even further, where not only am I doing that with myself, but that I'm learning to examine why everyone else is having that reaction to things. So, is that, am I getting the gist of what you're doing there?
You absolutely are. And actually, of course, it won't be surprising that those two things are the same thing. Because if you have the intellectual humility to examine the data set of your own experience, judgment formation, being of the same species as everybody else who's doing it, you can learn about how they're doing it. So no, you're absolutely right. And, it's so a lot of what I bring, I talked about, the epistemology degree and stuff. But one thing that I brought to bear on the Blue Republican article and all my work since is that I was trained in direct sales. I mean, I've knocked on hundreds of doors to sell books to people. I've done it the hard way. And, and salesman, an old salesman's adage is, if you shut up for long enough, the customer will tell you how to sell them.
Right.
That happens in politics all the time because it's human nature.
Right.
So in a way, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because the hard bit is to get off one's own, is to get disinvested from one's own beliefs and rightness. Once you do that work on yourself, the stuff you need to do with and for other people kind of becomes a lot easier.
Right. Yeah. I personally got into Stoicism for personal reasons, dealing with anxiety, and also, without getting too far into it, I have MS, and I had talked with other people who had MS who said that they were actually able to, it helped them with symptoms and things like that, to step back instead of having an emotional reaction to a symptom, stepping back and examining why they feel that way, and learning to look at it from almost a third person outside of themselves, and that it helped a lot with that. So that was sort of my personal motivation. In doing that, I have found that my messaging in libertarianism has changed somewhat, until I get pissed off, and then it goes back to the other thing. But until I get triggered enough, up until that moment, I'm able to be more effective with messaging by doing what you're saying, by listening and by doing those things. So I'm really interested about this program. I think I'm actually going to sign up after this, actually. But I wanted to ask you something about, and this is sort of an application of what we're talking about. Your last couple of articles, you had written about racial and gender issues. Most notably, you had written about the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. And you wrote a lot about how people in general don't spend much, and not just in those articles, but just in general, you've talked a lot about how people in general don't spend much time trying to see things from someone else's point of view. And so they end up talking past each other. Whenever the more heated the subject gets, the less they're actually talking with each other, to the point to where they're literally, their faces are past each other and they're just yelling this way. As you know, the libertarian movement in general, and I guess the Libertarian Party in particular, skews heavily white and male. I don't know proportionately how heavily it skews relative to the general population, but it does skew more heavily white and male in general, especially in the party, even though, in my mind, the libertarian message seems to be a natural fit for people of color and people who are more likely to be disproportionately victimized and poorly affected by the state. Do you think that there's something that libertarians are doing unconsciously that's pushing away women and people of color?
Yes.
Okay. And if so, what do you think can change to do that?
You know, I had
besides signing up for your program.
Besides, that goes without saying.
That's really just sign up for the program and fix it.
Yeah, we're out of here. You know, I had an aha moment not very long ago. And like some of the best aha moments, when I had it, I was like, this is so trivial. This is like so obvious. How have I missed it? The fundamental, this may not be completely precise, but I'm going to throw it out as a first order approximation.
Most of my episode is not precise, so go at it.
The first approximation, the real divide inside the Libertarian Party and maybe the movement is not between the radicals and the pragmatists, or those that talk a lot about electoral success and those that talk a lot about principle. The fundamental divide is between the kind and the unkind. There's an awful lot, and I think I'm going to, this goes back to your earlier question, say probably disproportionate amount of tolerance for unkindness that I see in libertarian communication. I see people who, based on overlap of message, overlap of belief in the moral and political importance of increasing liberty, should be broadly on the same team. But when a difference is exposed, a small difference, they won't just declare loudly the difference, which, by the way, I am completely fine with. I have paid large prices in my life personally for principle. I like principled people, and I like politicians.
Well, you're a libertarian. I mean, you're here with a bunch of principled people, so of course.
Absolutely.
Right.
But what happens is they turn up the volume too much on that, and it turns into gratuitous personal attacks. Now, yes, that goes on inside the Democratic Party. Yes, it goes on inside the Republican Party. But as a proportion of all of what's coming out, I don't think it goes on as much. And now, I'm not going to die on that hill, but that's the impression I get from dealing with groups that aren't just in, obviously I'm dealing mostly with and inside libertarian circles, but I'm also dealing with the outside. And that's how it feels to me right now. And I think that, you see, there is no principle, libertarian or otherwise, that depends for its utmost manifestation on being nasty to other people. I feel like it's normalized inside the passionate core of our movement right now, and I think it might. Again, I could be wrong, but I think it's an issue with respect to our effectiveness to actually convert, if I can use that word.
I wonder if, and I agree, and I wonder if
Sorry, and you asked about women and people of color. Sorry, and so just to tie it to that, the reason I went down the track is women differ from men in terms of personality by being a lot higher in agreeableness, right? So at the margins of disagreeableness, right, you've got, although the difference in the mean isn't too great, the difference in the number at the extremes is massively different between men and women. There are massively more men that are high on disagreeableness than there are women, and massively more women who are high on agreeableness than disagreeable. So when you've got this disproportionate, loud, ringing, disagreeable, which I'm calling unkind, way of communicating, of course course that puts people off who either in terms of personality are not disposed towards it, or who feel they have been victims of exactly that kind of attitude. And I don't blame them.
Yeah, and so that explains with women, and so is it with people of color? Is it just that? So if well, I'll let you say it. How do you say that? How would you say that translates over into what's happening with people of color and why they may not be as attracted to what, in my mind, would be a movement that's a natural fit for an issue that they're going through, even more so than with white people?
If I feel, rightly or wrongly, that a lot of my life experience comes out of being victimized, then the last place I want to go is a place where people are comfortable victimizing each other.
Okay. That's a good point. So even if our message is one of freedom, if we're doing it by attacking everyone, then that comes off as the exact opposite of what they're trying to be around in the first place.
Yeah, and let's be clear, right? First of all, the message it's not the message, it's not the political philosophy per se that makes the political or cultural reality. It's the political philosophy mediated by human beings with a load of other aspects to them that have nothing to do with politics, that have to do with their upbringing, that have to do with how they communicate with the other aspects of their morality that may not be political, right? So to think that somehow anybody should sign up just because of the message is to completely misunderstand the most basic grade 1 level of what I'm about and what I think any human being should be about, if only they care about other human beings. Right? I mean, let's think about to take this principle or this point and apply it in a different way. Okay. Donald Trump is our president.
I was just going to, yeah.
Right. So how many Trump voters, especially the ones that voted Democrat or didn't vote, let's just say didn't vote Republican before, how many of them do you think right now, I've read everything on his website. I know where he is on the issues, right? I've listened to his, the actual political message, or the message about the political philosophy that he expounds. Right. And you know what? When I did that, I noticed that I agreed with 8 out of every 12 things he said. So I'm a majority Trump guy, so I'm going to vote Trump. I mean, the whole thing is stupid. It's absurd. Now, the reason that Blue Republican worked, by the way, was not just because I did 2 fundamental things, and we've only discussed one. Now we need to discuss the other. I did the thing that we already talked about, which is I invited someone to check their progressive principles about the candidate and policies they were supporting by supporting Obama, rather than this supposed old white conservative Republican called Ron Paul.
Ultra-conservative, right.
But I also gave them a new safe identity. Right? Blue Republican was a new political identity. If I could say, if I were a Democrat who spent his whole life hating Republicans, I'd say, well, I'm not a Republican, I'm a Blue Republican, just for a year. Right? And I even had that whole thing about just for a year. I put just for a year in the title.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, in parentheses, just for a year.
Now, none of this was by accident. And if you actually take the Weapons of Mass Persuasion course, you will see a sentence by sentence analysis of why that article was so powerful. So, I mean, you'll see lots of other things, but that's one of the things I have in there. But as I say, it can be learned. So the reason I'm mentioning this thing about identity is it's not about, you don't sign up to a team because of what they profess. You sign up to a team because that team understands how you feel and can let you feel that they know how you feel, and that you trust that their broad moral motivations are close enough to yours that what they're going to do with the data they get about the world, which are going to be similar enough to the kind of data and perceptions you have, are going to be broadly in line with what you think is right. Now, that's what it means to identify with someone or with a group. And Trump did that with a certain group of the voters.
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't just about, because look, if all it was about was what you believe, that was the actual content of the message, all you would need to do for any campaign is write the 12 bullets and just make sure everybody reads them, and then just sit back and wait, right? And the whole thing, when you actually unpack it like that, and you do these little simple thought experiments, you start to feel the absurdity of how many of us in the libertarian movement do what we do, pretending that we're trying to, I don't know, increase liberty or persuade anybody.
Right. That's interesting. So on our sister show, or I guess my show that I have with our other person on this network, we talk a lot about the fact that Donald Trump, even though he's not overall a popular president, the reason we think he's going to get reelected is because he has easily the single largest movement right now is Trumpism, and it has almost nothing to do with policy. There is some, that they're economic and they're protectionist in that, they want reductions in immigration. They want an end to illegal immigration. Most of them are trade protectionists, but there are a lot that are just along for the ride. He's a businessman. He knows he knows how to get it done, and he's lived this great life, and maybe I can get some of that too. And he's talking about how much he loves America. And before him, and the reason that Democrats have had a difficult time fighting him is because their political movement was completely disbanded when Barack Obama retired. And so, he's not, when he was president, he had the largest political I guess, group or block, and it was built around hope and change as these, I guess, esoteric ideas. He was very post-liberal in a lot of ways. He did not get into policy often. He would touch on it. And you would know if you were really following what he was doing that he was a down the line hardcore progressive, but he didn't talk progressive philosophy. He talked your feelings. Donald Trump is all about your feelings, and he is at this point scandal proof to some extent. And I think we'll end up getting reelected entirely because he has touched people's feelings and made them feel like he's in a, they don't have to worry about it. He's got it taken care of, and they can just, he's gonna captain the ship, and everyone will be okay. And I guess what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have to tap into people's desire to know that we actually have their best interests in mind, and that the average conversation with the average libertarian activist may not leave them feeling that way.
Yes, and that they can trust how we see the world, that it's like them broadly, and what we're going to do about it. And given what you just said, by the way, about Obama and Trump, which was all broadly correct, given that all my libertarian friends, and I don't care if they're anarchists or minarchists, as long as they genuinely care about liberty, can observe and are upset about the fact that Obama in his way and Trump in his way are massively contributing to the takedown of our natural rights and individual liberties.
Right.
How can you say to me that a principled libertarian can be having arguments about minarchy versus anarchy rather than understanding what their opposition is actually doing to win? If you actually are driven by the principles of liberty and you're spending time having hypothetical discussions rather than learning how to reverse that, I'm not sure you are a principled libertarian. And I know that's a big thing to say, but perhaps what you're really enjoying is the intellectual ego trip. Right. And I'm not just saying that's a problem that, obviously there are people who are engaged in that all over the political spectrum.
Right.
But what is it we really trying to do here? Because having an argument on ideas is just that. Making declarations is not by definition being principled. Being principled is acting according to what you profess,
is demonstrating that principle, right? And now
even when it means you've got to do things that you'd rather not be doing because you'd rather be having a debate with a minarchist or an anarchist or whatever it is.
Like talk to normal people. See, I came into libertarianism, I guess, through the back door of philosophy, but I'm not uncomfortable talking with people, and I've met a lot of libertarians that also aren't. But there are a lot of libertarians that are, and I think because this is and maybe it's just because it's somewhat of a fringe group, that there are some people who actually almost the opposite of what you're saying, where they're less concerned about the philosophical underpinnings and foundations of libertarianism as much as they are the fringiness of it. And so whether they're doing it consciously or subconsciously, they're almost pushing away the normies and because they want it to remain this sort of debating society, as opposed to a group that's engaging 7 billion people and trying to change the entire, like you said, the paradigm, try to change the entire dynamic of how the world works. They'd rather kind of just argue with other socially, they say, libertarians are, economically conservative and socially awkward. And so I don't find myself socially awkward, but I have found that there are a lot of libertarians that are, and I think it's going to take people outside of that to push outside of it.
You know what? I'm going to say a couple of positive things now.
An hour in, we're going to start saying some positive
it's
stuff.
time to be nice. This guy talks about being kind. He's been such a bastard. First of all, the culture of the liberty movement is changing for the better. It is becoming culturally more mainstream, I think. You can see this. So I, started with the Blue Republican thing pretty much, and over 8 years, I see that the difference in the way that, let's say, the millennials coming up and now the Gen Zers dress, communicate, look, hold themselves, versus in 2011 when I went to my first, Ron Paul rally in Phoenix, and all the old white computer programmers with their guns. Right? I mean, literally. I mean, and that's great, right?
It's me. That's me. It's me.
I tell you, I love old white computer programmers with their guns. I mean, I'm with you. But so it's worth mentioning that, and anything I can do to support that, wonderful. But I would also say that the problem isn't social awkwardness, because there are a lot of socially awkward people outside the liberty movement that will identify with socially awkward people inside the movement. In fact, there's enough people that we need to convert to libertarianism that will be better met by people with their own social insecurities because they feel them too. The problem isn't, I don't think, the social awkwardness. I think the problem, again, the bigger problem is the willingness to alienate and condescend. Like the unkindness,
the eagerness to condescend. Yep.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are people I love dearly that I would have in my house, let's say, who are socially awkward, that maybe I need to do a little bit more work with, and those who are more, outgoing and charismatic, and But most people, I think, just instinctively draw the line at someone that clearly doesn't care about how they feel.
Right. Yeah. So
and that's good to draw a line. And frankly, by the way, here you go. Let's go meta, and also while staying super relevant. If I'm encountering your philosophy broadly for the first time, or some idea broadly for the first time, and obviously it's going to challenge mine. If I see that it's coming from someone who doesn't care about people feel, why would I even allow, subconsciously, let alone consciously, that this philosophy is geared to making people feel better, to having better lives? Like, it's logical to reject it out of hand. So, and then they say, well, it's a philosophy of non-aggression. So why do I feel like you're aggressing against me with your words, dude? Right? Why does it feel like that? Right?
And they're not necessarily the person experiencing this isn't necessarily having this conscious discussion with themselves that you're talking about, but it's an inherent, innate thing that they're experiencing this, you're attacking me with words and while talking to me about non-aggression, and this isn't jiving. They don't have to have much of a discussion inside. Their instinct is like, no, I got to get away from this.
Yeah. And, an instinct, I think we've mentioned the word a couple of times. Libertarians, being, like me as a physicist and like me as a philosopher of science, high on the rationality and loving their logic and their coherent arguments. If you read some of my articles, you can see that I have logical syllogisms in some of my articles. I am proudly an intellectual purist, and proudly committed to intellectual rigor. Nevertheless, one of the other things that, again, you'll find in the Weapons of Mass Persuasion program is I talk about don't poo-poo as a highly rational being your emotional and intuitive systems, because, you know, you can take a physics problem with just 3 physical entities and it not have a solution. Right, the 3-body problem in Newtonian mechanics, right? Yeah, the human mind cannot actually rationally deal with any problem where you've got more than 3 variables or a couple of uncertainties. And we're talking about political systems that affect 320 million people with free will, all of whom don't even, like, can't be defined in any, like, precise way, right? I mean, the idea that not having to bring to bear your intuitive system for making decisions under high complexity and high uncertainty and many variables, like some libertarians seem to want to insist isn't the case, is kind of absurd, right? Right. We need to, as rational, highly rational people in the liberty movement, we need to respect the people, allow their intuitive systems to give them information about what we're telling them, because ours are too. Because if we weren't, we wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning.
Right. They're just higher on the that side of the spectrum than we are, but we're all at some level of combining rationality with, you know, emotion and intuitiveness and instinct. They're
Absolutely.
just higher on maybe on the I always confuse the ego and the id, but they're higher on the they're lesser on the strict rationality and logic behind it, and more on the how it feels to them, and they've lived their lives that way. They've lived their lives based on how things feel to them, for better or worse, and we need to respect that most people are wired that way.
But also, every single person on the whole planet, including all the libertarians, are wired that way. It's just that when it comes to politics, and the domains, right? You know, our political beliefs, that's one domain of existence, right? You know, but show me the equivalent for how you determined whether you married the right person. Like you know, being a libertarian, right? I mean, it's a decision with at least as much consequence for your life as the political philosophy you're going to argue in your next 20 Facebook arguments. But I mean, you know what I mean?
At least as important as that.
At least, exactly. So let's stop being hypocrites, right? That's all I'm saying. You know, that's not all I'm saying. It's one of the big things I'm saying.
You've said many things, but I'm seeing it now. One of our commenters said that you are the Jonathan Pye of libertarianism, and I totally see that.
You know what? I know exactly what he's referring to. Or she. I don't know the gender of your commenter.
It's a he. Yeah.
It's a
he.
yeah.
He's a he.
It's he, and of course this is a libertarian podcast, so I should have put my money on he, right?
We've had some female commenters as well, so we had a mix.
But I was Jonathan Pye. I was going to say I made a conscious decision before coming on to this show, Spike, that to be a little more emotional and less what I usually do, which is what I'm really good at is kind of that's kind of what Obama did, right? Don't say anything, don't take a stand, and then people come in and then they can persuade because they project themselves onto what you offer.
Right. And thank you for not doing that, because that would have been a difficult show. Well, talk to me about this, and you go.
It wouldn't be difficult because I've done it in nearly every show.
Where you just spend the time asking me what I think?
No, I say things that I know people can agree with, even if those things mean different things to different people. That's what Obama was.
Okay. So it's like platitudes almost, yeah.
No, not platitudes. It's an acknowledgement that words actually do mean different things to different people based on the paradigms, or as determined by the paradigms in which they live. That's true for any two people. Any two people. You can find any two people, and I can show you an example. Being aware of that just affects how you communicate, if you're trying to communicate effectively to large numbers of people. So all I'm saying is, somebody said to me recently, Robin, you need to start throwing more stones. And I think they're probably right for my own
is the new stone throwing Robin that we're experiencing.
Yeah, he throws them with a smile, right?
Hey, I've loved this. I've loved every second of this. So I'm glad that you have chosen my show to unveil the Robin 2.0. So I know I'm loving it. I have one more question for you about messaging. So one of the things that I think I've been fairly good at. I have a lot of people I'm better at messaging to conservatives than progressives. I think even though most of my friends are progressives, I come from being a neocon and then a constitutionalist, and a paleocon, and I've sort of come out of that principle of smaller government. And so I think I speak that language better. And maybe I guess I've converted some progressives, but I've had a lot of people who I think I've pulled more over towards liberty. But one of the most difficult issues I've had, and obviously I don't want you to give away everything that's in your program, but just kind of maybe a snippet of, there are people who find a feeling of strength, and I guess that all goes back to self-worth, but a feeling of strength, and especially among men, masculinity, but even with women, I guess with some of the women, a feeling of protection, but just a feeling of strength that's being projected by our perpetual war against an ever-increasing amount of the world. And when I talk to them about it, and show them, that this isn't what you think it is. They're not making us safer. They're not, we're less safe because of it. It's creating terrorism. It's making people hate us, even though we weren't directly involved, I guess, except for our vote, if we voted for it. But, it's not a good thing. They will, many times after ceding that it may not even be a good thing, they fall back to, well, that's, we're strong and it's our strength. And how do you is there a way to get past someone who is getting almost an ego trip out of what's happening? The fact that they belong to a country whose government is, I guess, able to commit this level of mayhem around the world. I'm sure that's not what they're thinking when they say it, but I get a lot of people that are just like, yeah, well, that's American strength. And if they don't like it, then, that's tough on them. Is there how does one message around that? How is one empathetic to that, I guess, is what I asked.
So you're talking about a certain kind of, if I make sure I've understood this, right, of the neocon, let's say Republican right.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Neocons and just, I guess, a lot of new Trumpists who maybe had even voted for Obama, and now they've bought into this whole American strength being, militarism. But yeah, I guess it's all coming from that neocon thought process.
And you're saying that what you're finding is that people are happy to acknowledge that some military action, let's say, may not be working on its own merits, but it's justified just because it's an expression of strength per se. Is that what you're saying?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, I guess I've never had anyone go, yeah, I guess it's not a great idea, but we're strong. It's just they stop arguing whether it was a great idea or not and just basically sit on, this is our strength. So no, I haven't had someone specifically say, yeah, it's a terrible idea, but it shows our strength. It's just that where they started by saying this keeps us safe, this is, it's a good thing, we're liberating countries and all this stuff. When they're disabused of that, they just fall back on, well, this is our American strength.
I mean, the first thing is to do, always to do, if you can, whilst being, true, obviously, to your principles, is to acknowledge the importance of the thing motivating them.
Right.
So, in this case, it's American strength, and it's America and strength.
Right.
Right. So so what often you need to do when you're so far apart, right? This is, philosophically, right, is to start to engage the conversation about the component concept. What does America mean to you? And probably in this case, more importantly, well, yeah, what is it to be strong? And just talk about strength. Now, there's a really important principle that I teach in the program, that what you choose to talk about does more to cause someone to identify with you and therefore trust whatever your solution is than what you say about it. So the very fact that you might hear that and not make the case, but start by having, if let's say you're sitting down having a coffee with this person, a half-hour conversation about strength, and the history of American strength, and to actually like talk about that and not try to get your philosophy to the statement of why they're wrong before you finish that coffee. You don't have to. What you have to do is let them know that they can trust what's important to you about the world, right? Your perceptions of the world, so that you care enough about America and you care enough about strength to be having an interesting conversation about it, right? Then what you say, you could make the exact same case you were going to make before doing that, and it will have 180-degree different impact. It's not about the words. It's about the extent to which someone or how someone identifies with you at the point you say the words. That determines how they're going to receive them.
So in some ways, if they're throwing stuff up, it may just be their way of saying, I'm not comfortable with how this conversation is going, or how I don't think you get what it is I want. And so I'm throwing this up, and that sort of ends the conversation.
I don't think people. I mean, sometimes people do consciously do that because they just can't handle it, and they know they're
done.
They're out of their depth, right?
Right.
But no, what I'm saying is, the person is coming from this place because that's what motivates them. Now, underlying that, there might be some kind of fear or something.
Right.
But they're telling you, the customer, shut up for long enough, the customer will tell you how to sell them, right?
Yep.
So the customer's saying, sell me with America, sell me with strength. So what you're going to do is ask them what those concepts mean until the point that you can see what your way in is, so that you can see at some point in that 20, 30, 40-minute conversation, how long it's going to take, you're going to get given something that makes you go, that means he's going to agree with this other thing that I believe as a libertarian.
Right.
And you wait until you get that feeling, and then you go in with that thing. And your opening gambit, your hook, is going to be whatever that thing is that you're going to be directed to by virtue of what he says in answer to your genuinely humble, I want to find out more about you, why do you believe this crazy thing questions. But you're not going to let him know that you think he's crazy.
And also, they're going to feel like I'm actually listening to them and care about their worldview. Yeah,
you can't.
I will be.
Because you can't fake this. If you're going to get good, if you're a salesman and you want to sell product P to customer C, you need to know more about customer C than product P, right? It's the same when you're selling ideas. It's simple. In principle, it's simple.
Very good stuff, but not so simple that you can't purchase the Weapons of Mass Persuasion program.
Right, because what you have to is know how to do all the things I've just told you.
Exactly. Yeah, easier said than done. Right. Absolutely. So I had and thank you again for coming on. I had a big problem putting together the notes for this episode. My problem is that I've been following you for, I think, at least a year now. And every once in a while, I'll have a guest that has so much stuff that they've said and written that I want to talk about that we could be here for the better part of a week and possibly finish flushing it out. There were so many different things that I'm like, I want to talk about that. And then when I looked at my show notes, I'm like, just reading this took 30 minutes. There's no way we're going to be able to then have him answer what I just spent a half hour asking. So if it's okay with you, I would like to have you on every once in a while, because I have just to talk about like what you've most recently written and stuff like that, because I could talk with you all day. And I don't want to water down the core of what your message is by getting into 15 other different things and spending another 2 hours here, which I don't think. Also, my wife would be angry at me if I spent this long on it.
That Canadian body, you need to go get some, man.
Trust me. Well, 1, 2, and 3. Yeah.
That's it's very kind of you to say those things, and I'd be very glad to do it. And I appreciate you being a great interviewer, and I look forward to that.
Well, that's good. And thank you again for bringing us stone-throwing Jonathan Pye, Robin Koerner. I want that Robin Koerner every time. I want to come on. You idiots don't know what you're doing. You didn't call anyone idiots, by the way. No. But so before I let you go, and again, thank you so much. Any final thoughts, anything that you feel needs to be said, anything you want to plug? We're going to put all your stuff in the show notes so everyone can see it. But anything else that you want to say before we let you go?
Weapons of Mass Persuasion is probably the most important thing I want to plug. So that's weaponsofmasspersuasion.com, and thank you for mentioning that a few times. Right now, I have done a lot of work on putting these principles into a marketing paradigm campaign for the Libertarian Party. And if you want to find out about that, it's at giveeml.us. So that's giveeml.us. This hasn't been launched. I put it together, on my own dime and in my own time to present it to the LP, and I've offered it to them, for some dirt cheap knockdown rate if they want to use it. So if anybody who's a committed libertarian, certainly a party member, check out giveeml.us. And if this is something you like, just go pledge your support, or go to Facebook and go to the GiveML page on Facebook, and then you can check out what it's all about. I'm really kind of excited about some of the messaging in there. It's kind of a lot of fun. There's some good tongue-in-cheek stuff in there, and I think it would be a revolutionary. I'm biased, but I think it would be a revolutionary improvement for messaging for the LP. So that's something I'm kind of excited about right now. Yes, and then my own website where my articles are, robinkoerner.com. And your viewers can see how to spell it by looking at the screen there, robinkoerner.com.
Right.
And, follow me at Twitter, the normal stuff, rkoerner, RKOERNER. Oh, yeah, and I should plug this, right? Go to my website and you can order a signed copy of my book. Hold on, let me get that right.
A little bit to your right. A little bit to your right. Perfect. Yeah, it's perfect. There we go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, signed copy for any listeners to your show. If you go and order it from my site, you can order it from Amazon, but then it doesn't get to be signed and personalized. So.
Cool. Well, thank you again. Stick around for a moment during the outro. I'm going to talk with you a little bit more before I let you go. But thank you again. Guys, thank you so much again for joining me at My Fellow Americans. There will not be an episode of The Writer's Block tomorrow. In case you haven't heard, it's Thanksgiving. So unfortunately, the good side of that is that it's Thanksgiving. The bad, that's the silver lining to the bad fact that you won't be getting The Writer's Block tomorrow. But join us on Tuesday for the Muddy Waters of Freedom, where we will be talking about whatever amazing things have happened over the last week. And join us again here for My Fellow Americans next Wednesday. And my guest will be... Is that my guest next week? Yes. My guest next week will be Dwayne Lester, who does stuff for Americans for Prosperity. And so have a great week. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone, and God bless you.